I'm not one to generally be happy that sectors of an economy are going away, but now even the media is noticing that the plant-based meat alternative industry is flailing. That just a year ago, we were told this was the future, that everybody was going to eat this stuff. 3 years ago, we were told this. And a year ago, when they were saying that this was the future, people knew they were lying, that they didn't believe it themselves, because in the run-up to 2020 and the events that all changed everything for a short time for everybody, for a short time that seemed like was forever, and we are still dealing with the changes of. After that event, it became painfully obvious that people weren't buying this stuff. During the time when everything in the world was just shut down for 2020 and into 2021 in some places, a few things happened. The consumption of meat, but especially red meat, skyrocketed. And while food delivery services thrived during that time, a lot of people suddenly found themselves cooking. They had extra time on their hands. They weren't, at the very least, they weren't commuting anymore, and many were going weeks or months without working. So people took to YouTube, learned how to cook, watch cooking videos, learned how to cook meat, and consumption of red meat went up a lot. I covered that on this channel at the time. Well, not during the events, but afterwards I covered it. And the interesting thing about this is that the powers that shouldn't be have never gotten the memo on this. They never really accepted that people don't want this stuff. Because the other thing that happened is when people started consuming more red meat at that time, the consumption of plant-based meat alternatives collapsed. This is when Beyond Meat's woes began. This is when we started seeing a lot of these startup companies that were trying to produce different meat alternatives suddenly found themselves not making their sales quotas. I've covered already once this week, and probably will again in the coming weeks, stories about these companies closing their doors, laying off large amounts of people, or them having to diversify into other areas to stay open. The lesson here should be that people don't want to eat fake meat. That's not really what's going on here, though. Because, yeah, well, that's a big part of it. There is another meat alternative that's being pushed that's not normally what we think of as a meat alternative, and that is the lab-grown cultured meat. Basically, they take a cow and they clone its cells, and then they grow the meat in a laboratory setting. That doesn't sound terribly appealing to me, especially when some scientists were kind of skeptical of this and don't think this should be leapt on as the way powers that shouldn't be are pushing it. They describe it as essentially cancer cells. That's what we're eating if you eat this stuff. That these have much more in common with that kind of a animal cell than it does with, say, the muscle tissue of a ribeye or pork loin or whatever it is you're eating. But that is now what they're pushing. And it seems like maybe the plant-based thing, they're going to keep pushing that, but it's definitely they're not pushing it as much as they had been. And they're pushing this for all the typical reasons. All the green reasons, the thermometer problem, we'll call it. All these other things. That's why they push it. Because they want you to buy the idea that animal agriculture is the reason for the perceived problem that they keep telling us is out there involving the environment. Animal agriculture is not actually the driver. It has to do with the fact that animal agriculture is centralized. A lot of the animals are produced in one place, shipped off to places far away to be processed, when it used to be that communities took care of the raising and the processing and distribution of the meat locally, mostly. Yeah, there was some movement of the stuff, but it used to be much more decentralized. And we really should get back to decentralization of this as much as we can. Granted, there are people who live in places that can't grow their own, raise their own cattle. Grant that. People live in the high deserts or on islands and places where there just isn't the room for grazing. Obviously, they're an exception to this rule, but there's literally no reason why people in the American heartland should be eating beef that's imported from Mexico when the two things that this part of the country seems to have are, more than anything else, are corn and cows. There's just no reason for it. And the same is true anywhere else. Plenty of cattle are raised in the Pacific Northwest, in Southern California, in New York. Any state you can name in the continental United States, cows are raised there. There's no reason why it should be that we should be importing meat from overseas and exporting the higher grade American beef. But that's what's going on here. And so as a consequence of this, and because of the all sort of the constant drumbeat of rhetoric about the all things green, we get stories like this one today, which is from the website called Food Navigator. And this is an industry insider website. So they give us this headline. Alternative protein segment diverges as more plant-based players shutter. Cultured meat passes milestones. It's a few days old, but the thrust of this article is that the industry is now recognizing that plant-based meat alternatives are failing. That they're simply economic drivers for this that are making people not adopt it. One is that it's a higher price point than any animal meat you buy. At least equivalent of any animal, any equivalent that they're trying to sell you as a plant-based form to the real meat, the plant-based version is always more expensive. And it's because it's an ultra-processed food. That's why it's more expensive. Because they're using expensive ingredients and then processing it, and they can't do it to the same scale, say like Kraft does with macaroni and cheese. Macaroni and cheese or Maruchan ramen or any of those things are super cheap because they make them at such scale that they can do it. Whereas beef, chicken, pork are raised in the United States to the scale where it keeps them more affordable. And if you're watching this internationally, I'd be curious for you to let me know in the comments which is cheaper. Are Beyond Beef hamburger patties cheaper for you in Canada or the UK or wherever you're watching this outside of America? Are they cheaper than the actual ground beef equivalent? I'm very curious, so let me know if you know off the top of your head. I've done videos before of going into Sam's Club and Costco and showing you the pictures of the bulk versions of these things, and still the prices for the Beyond Meat when they're comparable, people still don't buy them for whatever reason. And it's partially because they don't taste like real meat. Most people aren't aware that the fake meats, the meat alternatives, don't actually have nutritional value, and they aren't really aware that meat has nutritional value because we are constantly told that meat is mostly just protein and fat when there's a lot more to meat than that. It's our job in this space to educate people on just how much of a superfood that meat is. But the industry is taking note, and in that article they push this idea that tells us that the future really is going to be lab-grown cultured meat. That there are strides being made in the technology of this, and they're getting ready to scale this up to replace the actual traditional conventional meat, and they'll be able to do it using pure market forces, so they say. I'll touch politics here just a little bit, and while I'm a fairly conservative person, I will be the first to admit that there really is no such thing as a free market. There just isn't. Not when you get business entities and governments working together in the marketplace. They change market conditions. There really is no such thing as a free market. You can work towards a freer market. Maybe a free market is in theory possible, but we don't have one. What we have here instead is gigantic economic forces working to promote cultured meat. And the end result of this, their goal is to get the price down on their cultured meat to be lower than the conventionally raised meat. And I'm very curious, are you going to try it? Because as I said just a couple minutes ago, scientists who are skeptical of this point out that the growth of this product is more like cancer cells than it is, say, normal beef cells, normal healthy cells. Is this something you want to eat? I'm very curious what you have to say. So let me know in the comments. But that's what they're pushing now. Many of you I've reported before on cultured meat, but it really does look like they're going to be in the next year or so pushing this stuff, getting FDA approval for things that they don't already have it for. And you might start seeing this in your grocery store soon. So I implore you, please read the labels and read them carefully. Because if you don't want to eat this stuff, then you better be reading what you're eating. And this will also probably find its way to fast food first. When the plant-based alternatives, when Beyond Beef especially was failing, they started making partnerships with the various fast food companies. And pretty much all of them, except for whatever reason, Carl's Jr. / Hardee's in America, all of them but that one company got rid of their Beyond patties. Carl's Jr. and Hardee's still offers it. I don't know why, but they do. Can't imagine they sell very much of that stuff. You can expect to see this plant-based or this meat alternatives, this lab-grown cultured meat, the cloned beef, and cloned pork. You could expect to see that in the fast food restaurants soon. If we don't have one by this time next year, I would be surprised. But let me know, would you try it? I will strive my entire life to not eat that stuff. Even if that means never eating a hamburger patty from a fast food place again in a bind. Just being more vigilant about packing, Carnivore Crisps with me. That seems to be my go-to. Unopened pack of that doesn't need to be shelf stable. I keep it in my car. And, if I'm finding myself out and about longer than normal and I start getting hungry enough where I need to eat something and crack the bag open, it's much better than that stuff. But would you try this stuff? Would you try it? Let me know in the comments. Like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. So to share this on social media, that helps too. I'm Anthony Stine, the Practical Carnivore. Thanks for tuning in.